Ladies and gentlemen, partners and distinguished participants, a warm good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all joining from different parts of the world. I am Asmita from Regional Resource Center for Asia and the Pacific, RRCAP, located in Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand, welcoming all to the MCR 2030 Cities and Partners Engagement in Asia and the Pacific webinar, jointly organized by RRCAP in partnership with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, the United Nations Environment Programme, and the Educational Partnership for Innovation in Communities Network. So before we start, I would like to briefly touch upon some of the housekeeping rules. First, I would like to inform all the participants that the session will be recorded and we are going live through our Facebook page. The recording can be accessed through our Facebook page later on. Secondly, on the bottom towards the center of your screen, you will see the chat tab and the question and answer tab. We strongly advise participants to use the question and answer tab to ask the question to the panelist. To ask the question, you can open the question and answer window, type your question and click send. You can also like or comment on the attendee's question. Reacting to other attendees' question will help us to select the most popular questions to answer. Third, we request participants to use chat function only when they are sending messages. Messages can be sent to the whole group or privately to any specific attendees, panelist, or the technical host. Please do not use chat tab to write your questions to the panelist, as we may not be able to track your questions. Now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce the moderator of this webinar, Head of Climate Change and Disaster Risk Resilience Cluster of AIT RRCAP, Mr. Furba Lendup. Over to you, Furba.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Thailand. My name is Furba Lendup, and I work for the Regional Resource Center for Asia and Pacific at the Asian Institute of Technology based here in Thailand. First and foremostly, I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining this webinar session, and especially our distinguished speaker for the session today. So before we start, we would like to launch a small poll now to see from which region you are joining and which organization do you belong to. So it's right there on the screen. Can you please answer those two questions? You can select the region from where you're joining from and to which organization do you belong to. So in the process, I would like to start before we get the full answer here. The webinar today is for 1.5 hour session, and it will start with the keynote address from our center director, followed by 5 presentations. As my colleague has already mentioned before, today we have our speakers from United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, United Nations Environment Program, Education Partnership for Innovation in Communities, that is EPIC Network, and the Regional Resource Center for Asia and the Pacific. Now, each speaker today has 10 minutes to present. This will be followed by a Q&A session for 20 minutes. And then we will end the session making a brief conclusion. Now, to start with, we all, I think, probably agree that climate change perhaps is one of the most discussed and debated topic of our time. There are various credible scientific reports that says this climate change is going to exacerbate and we will bear the consequences for years to come. And one of those places at the forefront of climate change battle is our cities. And last year in 2019, during the World Mayor Summit in Copenhagen, United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres said that the cities are the place where climate change battle will be largely won or lost, which means that if we do or combat climate change in the cities, we are fairly doing good at the global scales. This is because of the fact that 70% of the global carbon emissions comes from the city. And then cities are the places where 55% of the world population lives. And this is expected to increase to 68% by 2050. This is from the UN report back in 2018. However, we all know that cities are also the powerhouse of economic development. This is because of the fact that, according to the data, 80% of our global GDP comes from the cities. So these are some of the factors that underscores why fighting climate change in the city is very vital for our survival. For example, in Bangkok, this is a huge city, and we have more than 10 million people living here in Bangkok, in the city alone. And a couple of years back, the IPCC report has warned that Bangkok city is sinking. And they indicated that the city is sinking at the rate of 10 centimeters annually because of land subsidence, sea level rise, flood, storm, and a lot of things to do with our planning. So therefore, the role the cities should play and can play in the face of climate change is going to be our key discussion today. That is to bring cities on the resilient pathways towards achieving some of the high-profile international agreements that we have all agreed to. For example, like Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the New Urban Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and most importantly, the Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2030. While we talk about Agenda 2030, if you look at the progress report that was produced just a couple of months ago by UNEP, looking back at the progress, then we haven't had made much progress. And one of the main reasons they have indicated is a lack of integration in implementing those activities that would contribute to targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, when we talk about lack of integration, partnership and cooperation are fundamental and key to this getting a strong partnership. So through this webinar, we hope to build a very strong partnership by understanding various approaches and roadmaps used by different organizations, which will be presented, and understanding operational structure that can be established to support, connect with the regional networks. And then understanding the Making City Resilient 2030 campaign in establishing new partnership and greater engagement. And we hope that the feedback from this session will be useful for our Making City Resilient 2030 Asia Pacific Regional Coordination Committee to be considered later. Yeah, so with this, now I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Naoya Tsukamoto, to kindly take the floor to make the keynote address, please.
Thank you, Burba. Your Excellencies, respected mayors, distinguished participants, partners, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon from Bangkok. On behalf of the Regional Resource Center for the Asia and the Pacific of the Asian Institute of Technology, I'm pleased to welcome all of you to this joint webinar on Making City Resilient 2030, Cities and Partners Engagement in Asia and the Pacific. This webinar is hosted by the RRCAP and convened in collaboration with UNTRR, UNESCAP, UN Environment, Network, EPIC Network, and sponsored by the Ministry of the Environment of Japan. Please let me say a few words about the RRCAP for the benefit of those of you who may not be so much familiar with this organization. RRCAP was established 31 years ago as a joint initiative of AIT and UNEP. Its mission is to provide resources for policy setting toward sustainable development, acting as a science policy interface by regional networking, processing and assessing information and knowledge for governments, local communities, and other stakeholders in the region. In over 30 years of its operation, RRCAP has provided support for the development and implementation of policies and planning, strengthening the capacity of government as well as the other stakeholders to address sustainable development through the environment window. The purpose of my presentation today is to set a scene as a background of this webinar. I would like to put on the table an idea of productive conflict. For the first, let us talk about the unavoidable conflicts within a city. Urbanization is taking place at an unprecedented rate. Today, 54% of the world's population lives in urban area, which is expected to increase to 6% by 2050. The concentration and high density of population and economic activities bring out high demands of food, water, energy, land, high loads of solid waste, air pollutants, wastewaters, traffic congestions, contagion of diseases, disparity of quality life of residents, increase of crimes, and running short of necessary budget to deal with these problems. And there also exist diversified interests among different stakeholders from governments, private enterprises, civil societies, academia, and other NGOs. Under such inner circumstances of a city, conflicts among different interests of stakeholders are unavoidable. Then, for the next, let us look at the external interaction between a city and the environment or nature. Here is a conceptual diagram to show the relation between a city and the three pillars of the sustainable development. A city is within a society, and the society expands its economic activities beyond the boundary into the nature or the environment. The economic activities of a city put pressure to the environment in various forms, such as continuous emission laws of solid waste, air pollutant, wastewaters, and greenhouse gases. High demands, exploitation of resources from nature, and then the environment and the nature returns to a city such responses as polluted environment, severe climate, along with the change of temperatures and precipitations, loss of biodiversity, loss of plants coverage of the land to erosion, fragility to natural disasters, negative impacts to food production and clean water supply. These negative responses add fuels to the unavoidable conflicts among stakeholders, since the fragility to the bad impacts are quite different among economic, social, and environmental situation of people. What I would like to propose here is that we can transform these unavoidable conflicts to positive platforms of mutual understanding and actions. You know already that you cannot be in a happy situation with sufficient budget to solve the problems, but you have unlimited possibility of human intelligence to solve the problems. I would like to argue that enhancement of common understanding and respect to differences are two essentials for this positive transformation. We can enhance common understanding among stakeholders through taking advantages of scientific approaches, objective data, accountable explanations, transparency of information. To connect common understanding and concrete actions, we need to focus and respect differences, including indigenous knowledge, different perspectives, different among generations, and so on. Since differences are mother of innovations. I would like to share with you some of the key elements to achieve the positive platforms and effective actions for adaptation. And you will have opportunity to learn about all of them in this webinar today. The first element is international framework. An international framework is effective to synergize human knowledge and promote cooperation. The second phase of Making City Resilient 2030 global campaign was launched on 28 October this year to ensure cities become inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable by 2030. RRCAP welcomes this MCR 2030 initiative led by UNDRR and express our full commitment, support, and engagement with it. The second element, nature-based solution. The history of development is repeating to understand the limitation of artificial technologies and discover hidden system or wisdom of the nature. Nature-based solution is a sophisticated way to enhance resilience in an effective, economical, and environment-friendly manner. Sustainable urban development. Enhancement of city resilience is not a single operation. It can be achieved through planned integration to the sustainable urban development. UNESCO has ample of experience and knowledge on this area. Education for innovation. Seeds of innovation germinate on fertile soil made by education. The EPIC network very much successfully demonstrated that a network of stakeholders led by a university works effectively on it. And we will also learn about the useful tools developed by EPICnet. The last but not least, capacity development is an indispensable element to make things happen on the ground. Since 2016, RRCAP has been engaged in capacity development on resilience, putting emphasis on climate change, to which participated 140 officials from 20 cities in 16 countries, and over 30 specialists from training service providing institutions in the region. I would like to thank our key partners, UNDRR Regional Office in Bangkok, UNESCAP, UN Environment, and EPICnet, and all of distinguished speakers for their contribution, support, and trust they placed to RRCAP to host this webinar. I would like to express my gratitude to the Ministry of the Environment of Japan and its officials for continuous cooperation with RRCAP and provision of financial support. RRCAP will join and support MCR 2030 initiative and its implementation in 2021 and beyond. It is our pleasure and honor that RRCAP was invited and joined as an official member of the MRC 2030 Regional Coordination Committee for Asia and the Pacific region. Finally, I would like to express my hope that this joint webinar will be useful for all of you to learn on various approaches and roadmaps used by different UN agencies and other relevant organizations. I warmly welcome you again. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nao-san, for setting the context. Nao-san briefly touched upon what does urbanization means and kind of the interplay among various components and the holistic approach towards a solution to make our city more resilient. Now to start our session, I have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Omar Hussein Amach, who is the External Relations Officer, United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction based here in Bangkok. Mr. Omar leads the communication and resource mobilization, and he is also the UNDRR focal point for Making City Resilient 2030 Secretariat for Asia and the Pacific. He will talk about MCR 2030 campaign, its strategic objectives, components, key steps, and partnership in running this campaign to make our more city resilient. So Mr. Omar, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And I want to thank the RRCAP and the Asian Institute of Technology for hosting this event on the MCR 2030 initiative and for being part of its governance structure at the regional level. So the idea for MCR 2030 came as a result of UNDRR's consultations with cities and partners on what to do once the original MCR campaign comes to an end this year. Overwhelmingly, the response was that the work needed to continue and we needed to integrate the lessons from the previous campaign into the new version. So this led to the development of MCR 2030, which will start operations in January 2021 and end in December 2030. Next slide, please. So here you can see the strategic objectives of MCR 2030. And the first two are similar to the old campaign and that they're focused on advocacy and planning. So the old campaign was launched in 2010, and its initial focus was on raising awareness and helping cities understand their risks. Then in 2015, after the adoption of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the campaign added tools and mechanisms to support resilience building and local DR planning. The third objective is new because there is no component in the previous campaign focused on implementation, but now it is a core component of MCR 2030. The cross-cutting objectives, those are also new. So we're looking at strengthening the link between local and national governments, because in many cases, having the support of the national government can help scale up local efforts. We're also looking at strengthening the horizontal links between different sectors and stakeholders. So this includes, for example, the private sector, academia, civil society, and so on. And lastly, we hope to foster mentorship and peer-to-peer learning between cities. Next slide, please. So what will MCR 2030 include? So one of the big takeaways from the last campaign was that resilience is a big topic. Cities usually don't know where they stand in terms of becoming resilient. Are they at the beginning of the process? Are they actually quite advanced? So to address this, MCR 2030 introduces a roadmap. So cities know where they are and can find options depending on that stage they're in. Second, it's important to bring in partners because very few cities can do this on their own. But then how do you focus the efforts of these partners to help the cities? That is the role of the third element, the regional network, which will then be governed through a regional coordination mechanism. MCR 2030 will also include a suite of tools and knowledge products for cities, and these will be provided by our supporting partners. These tools will be accessible to cities through an online dashboard, which will also allow cities to record and track their progress. And as part of this dashboard, they're also going to have access to a registry, which will include private sector entities that can offer specialized services. Next slide, please. So this chart presents an overview of how MCR 2030 works. At the top, you can see the 3 objectives that I mentioned, knowing better, plan better, and implement better. And then below that, you can see that cities will be classified into 3 stages according to their place on the resilience roadmap. So stage A, B, and C. Stage A is for cities that are just starting off, trying to understand what is resilience, what is risk reduction. And so the activities associated with that are mostly around advocacy. Stage B is where cities start to convert that knowledge into action plans that can help them achieve a higher state of resilience. So stage B, for example, would end when a city has a DRR strategy, or even better yet, has managed to integrate disaster risks into its development planning. And then stage C is for a city that is now putting these plans into action and is looking for partners and tools to support implementation. The green part below that, that's not set in stone, but these are some of the areas that cities have highlighted to us that they need support and help with. And below that, you will see the cross-cutting themes that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So cities can join at any stage. They don't necessarily have to join at stage A. Some cities that did pretty well under the old campaign had made significant progress towards building their resilience, could potentially join, for example, at stage C. Now, how placement will be determined will be based on a easy to use assessment tool that will be part of the online dashboard. A city's placement will then determine the kind of tools and partners it will have access to. There's also going to be a clear ask for cities to commit to the process so that this is not just a one-off event where they sign up and then forget about it, but rather we're hoping that this is going to be a journey towards building resilience. Next slide, please. So MCR 2030 is designed to be co-owned and co-delivered by its partners. And these include a number of core partners at the global level. And they will be providing the strategic direction and overview over the next 10 years. And these are, we've lumped them into the Global Coordinating Committee, and you can see their names and logos at the bottom. Next slide, please. But then we have regional partners, and these include different UN agencies that are involved in urban resilience, NGOs, academia. And these partners will be, some of them will be members of the Regional Coordinating Committee. And this will be the committee that will not only support strategic planning at the regional level, but also support with implementation. Next slide, please. So MCR 2030 also envisions a big role for the private sector, and this is based on some of the feedback we received from cities that have gone through the previous campaign. Particularly, they need access to specialized commercial services, and we wanted to provide them with a means to find out who's offering those services, how to get in touch with them. And so as part of the online dashboard, there's going to be a registry or marketplace, and companies, research centers affiliated with universities can sign up, list their services, their expertise, and then it'll be up to the city and the service provider to agree on the terms of a arrangement. The MCR 2030 Secretariat will not be involved in these negotiations, but we're at least hoping to bridge the gap and provide the means for them to connect. Next slide, please. Lastly, scaling up work through national governments is very important and something that we are looking into. Also, we're looking to partner with national associations of municipalities, given their reach and their networks of cities. Next slide. Here is the governance structure. And you can see at the top, we have the Global Coordinating Committee, which provides the strategic direction. And then below that, we have 5 regional committees to cover the entire world. And these will be supporting the implementation. Next slide. And as was mentioned, MCR 2030 launched on October 28th. And along with that launch, our website became available. And so cities that are interested in the initiative can go to the website to learn more about it. They can also sign up to express their interest in joining once the full functionality is available. And we expect to have the online dashboard and the placement assessment all active by late January 2021. Next slide. So with that, I end this quick briefing on MCR 2030, and thank you all for your time and attention. And hopefully a copy of this presentation will be made available in case any of you would like to get in touch with us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Omar, for sharing the information on how we can come together to run this MCR 2030. I think for those of you who are already aware of this campaign, you might have had some good ideas on how to move forward in a more coherent manner. And for those of you who are quite new to this, it might have probably intrigued you or provoked you and for your cities to bring on a radar to be part of this initiative. And now I would like to introduce to you our next speaker. Our second speaker we have today is Mr. Kurt Garrigan. He is the Chief of Sustainable Urban Development Section at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. In short, that's UNEP. Mr. Kurt will talk about the future pathways for cities in building urban resilience. So the floor is yours, Mr. Kurt.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the very kind introduction. Also, our appreciation to all of the organizers and the sponsors of this webinar and the overall series. I'd like to share my screen. I'm sorry, and get to the correct document. Hopefully you can all see this, future pathways for cities and building urban resilience. As I begin, let me just start with a quick introduction about SCAP. We are the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific. We consist of 53 member states and 9 associate members. We have essentially kind of 3 main elements of our work. First, to foster policy dialogue, serve as a regional cooperation and intergovernmental platform. We also provide technical assistance in capacity building, and then we also do research and analysis, share peer learning and knowledge across the region and with other UN agencies and local authorities and networks. So the question here, I think that is kind of before us today is how to improve resilience, especially at the city level. SCAP undertook last year, or published last year, a much longer process.
But we are not seeing your presentation.
You're not seeing the presentation?
Yeah, maybe.
Sorry about that. Let me try again. How about now?
Still not there yet. Can we share from here? Probably, I think we can share from here.
Okay, I sent it in advance. Very well, thank you. If you can proceed to the next slide. So as I was explaining SCAP's role in the region, we have 53 member states, 9 associate members. Next Advance, please. You can advance to the next. Okay, next slide, please. And the next slide. So SCAP undertook work a couple of years ago that resulted in this publication that was launched in 2019 called the Future of Asian and Pacific Cities Report. Previously, we had done a fair amount of analysis that looked at the state of Asian and Pacific cities, but we decided to really look more into the future and identify what are the transformative pathways that cities really need to secure sustainable urban development to the future. This was really looking at some of the demographic information that was leading us to look at the overall impact of urbanization in the region. And there were 4 thematic priorities that came really to the forefront as a result of consultations with cities, with national governments, with regional networks, and individual stakeholders. And they are here before you. The first is the future of urban and territorial planning, looking at planning processes that consider growth, quality of life goals, the SDGs. The second is on future of urban resilience and strategies that look at breaking down silos, that's scaling up nature-based solutions and engage all stakeholders. The third is how to leverage smart and inclusive city priorities, including technologies, and bridge digital divides that overcome really some of the issues that are more socially related in cities. And the fourth is the future of urban finance, how to finance all of these improvements going forward. So we didn't look at any of these as a kind of a silo. We said that these are 4 integrated and holistic elements that need to be considered throughout. But for each of these thematic pillars, we identified some clear policy pathways. So the first is really looking at nature-based solutions and resilient infrastructure. The transition from hard or gray infrastructure to looking at green infrastructure, nature-based solutions to reduce some of the inherent risks. But the second really is, and if you can try to advance the slide, please. Advance. Okay. So again, looking at some of the green solutions, constructed wetlands, you're looking at urban agroforestry, the connection between what happens in the expansion of urban areas and how it affects rural and peri-urban areas related to food security, employment, because those all come into play in developing resilient communities, not just at the city level, but really at a much broader scale. And then also things like unique to coastal cities, protecting mangroves and coastlines. Next slide, please. The second is understanding the informal economy. And if you advance here, we recognize that many of the cities across the region rely on informal economies. In some smaller and intermediate cities, the informal economy can be up to 80 or 90% of the overall economy. So it's important, as we're talking about resilience, to not just look at what are the environmental or built environment solutions, but how do you engage all stakeholders so that they also have elements of preparedness and resilience in their everyday activities. So we encourage the inclusion of domestic workers, street vendors, informal day laborers, and identifying processes that allow for their engagement to build overall resilience. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the third is about creating partnerships. And here, if you advance, we developed in collaboration with the launch of this report, what's called the Penang Platform for Sustainable Urbanization, which is a group of cities, UN entities, NGOs, and networks, really assisting in the implementation and the mainstreaming of many of these policy pathways. We recognize within all of these elements that there is a greater need, especially in the smaller and intermediate cities, to strengthen decentralization and support what cities can do. We do know that there are capacity needs, and a lot of that has already been discussed in previous presentations, but also looking at how these communities, as they develop, can become economically diverse, and how can they manage and attract capital to build their tax base, but also to finance many of these infrastructure investments that will be needed. That will require a partnership and can no longer rely simply on intergovernmental transfers from central governments. Next slide, please. So the fourth really is about looking at big data and technological literacy. We recognize that, again, in many of these cities that will see most of the economic and population growth in the coming decades, it's not the mega cities in this region, it's the secondary and smaller cities that most of the population growth will be centered. And so there is an opportunity really for those cities to leapfrog if they can leverage some of the more prominent innovations that are being developed. So that looks at, how do you use solutions such as crowdsourcing? How can we use blockchain technologies? How do we use data to improve public procurement? But really build communities that have the IT infrastructure built in on the front end. And how do you build resilience in all of these elements as they go forward? So these are many of the policy pathways that are inherent simply within the resilient framework, but it requires really looking at all of the other pillars. So how do you build a foundation through urban and territorial planning that allows for some of these resilience strategies to be put into place? How do we leverage technologies and data and build smart communities that contribute to resilience? And then how do we finance all of these improvements going forward? Next slide. Next. And the issues are really, becoming obviously in the current context of the pandemic, very prominent in everyone's mind. And as cities are on the front lines of responding to the current pandemic, how can they learn from previous outbreaks and build resilience to future pandemics? So we've done a policy brief on COVID-19 in cities, which will be on our website shortly. But a lot of what we're learning from the cities and the city networks is that while cities are fundamentally impacted by pandemics, and this goes back, into history, looking at the impacts on urbanization. Often it's talked about how it will take many decades for cities to recover. But when we looked back, what we found is that some of these epidemics and pandemics actually result not in a migration back to rural areas, but in a significant investment in urban infrastructure that allows them to come back relatively quickly and address some of the infrastructure gaps. So this is one example here in Surat from 1994, where there was overcrowding and significant gaps in sanitation. The infrastructure investments as a result of the pandemic actually allowed the city to remarkably come back very quickly and become the second cleanest city in just 2 years. So I think as cities develop and national governments develop their recovery plans, this is a significant discussion point that all cities and national governments and entities need to have. How do we build resilience into these recoveries? Next, please. So these were, again, the kind of the 4 policy pathways in resilience, and this is just a summary. If we can go to the next slide. And implicit in all of what I said were 3 areas: decentralization, decarbonization, and digitalization. So building again on these three elements are underlying principles for resilience. Next slide, please.
Including increase.
We are developing just a few some policy guidance and projects that demonstrate and illustrate for cities and the national governments how to address some of these and mainstream solutions. We're working with cities to prepare voluntary local reviews as part of the 2030 agenda. We have developed an Asia Pacific Mayors Academy to build the capacity of newly elected mayors to understand and implement some of these solutions. We're working with UN Habitat and other UN agencies on building urban economic resilience post-COVID. We're looking at addressing more sectoral issues like plastic waste and looking at sustainable urban resource management and localizing the SDGs. So next slide, and I think that may be it. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time. Thanks and apologies for the technical difficulties.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Kurt. I think you have laid out 4 most important areas for future resilience. Number 1 being scaling up nature-based solutions, which is a very important topic, I think, these days, and also how to go on with the resilient infrastructure. Some people call it smart green infrastructure as well, and understanding informal economy and focusing on urban poor as a change agent. And then strengthening partnership among national, state, and local actors, and also utilizing data sources, big data sources, and improving technological literacy. So now we have the third speaker. Our third speaker is Dr. Liz Mullen-Bannert. She is a program officer and a coordinator for the Global Adaptation Network at the United Nations Environment Program based here also in Bangkok. Dr. Liz's presentation is on UNEP's work in making cities more resilient through nature-based solutions. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, and I hope that you can see my screen. Are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, please, go ahead, please.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that warm invitation and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. My name is Liz Mullen-Bernhardt. I'm in the Climate Change Adaptation Unit at the UN Environment Program's headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm also the coordinator of the Global Adaptation Network, which is hosted by UNEP. And I'd like to give you a little bit of an overview of our work in the area of nature-based solutions and how we use that to help increase resilience in cities. I'm cognizant of the time, so I will try to make some brief points, but I'm happy to have my presentation available afterwards and also answer questions as well after the presentation. So just to give you a very, very brief overview of UNEP's mandate, we are, of course, a globally acting organization. We have a long history and mandate on helping countries increase their resilience and adaptation efforts. And we do that in a number of ways. One of them is to help them implement national adaptation plans, increase their readiness to adapt through, for example, the climate change process. We also help countries to scale up and expand information and knowledge about adaptation, in particular with a mandate on ecosystem-based adaptation, otherwise known as nature-based solutions for adaptation. I know there are a lot of terms that might mean similar things, and we've been doing that for the last 10 years, and I can give you a little bit of an overview of our portfolio in that work. Increasingly, we provide more and more one-on-one country support on the ground to help countries with adaptation interventions across a large variety of different kinds of ecosystems, mountains, coasts, drylands, or peri-urban areas as well. And one of the things that we do is we work very hard to gather information and knowledge from these projects and from our normative work, and share that through things such as the Global Adaptation Network, which I'll tell you a little bit about. Furthermore, we help countries access and scale up climate finance, and I'll give you a little bit of information about that. And we put out a number of normative and analytical products on adaptation. Just to give you a little bit of an overview on the scale of work that we do in adaptation, we currently have more than 55 projects in countries around the world in adaptation. More than 30 countries are covered. 5 of these specifically deal with urban ecosystem-based adaptation, including a number in Asia, and I'll give you an example of one of the things we're doing there. Altogether, these projects have more than 90,000 beneficiaries around the world, and we're restoring almost 3,000 hectares globally. We do a lot that directly relates to disaster risk reduction, in particular on coasts, for example, with mangrove or coral reef restoration. And we also work on rivers, mountains, a number of other ecosystems. A lot of people ask about the definition of ecosystem-based adaptation and would like to know what it means. And basically speaking, EBA is when we particularly work on restoring or protecting ecosystem services for the purpose of adaptation. It's very closely linked to the issue of nature-based solutions. What we do in particular, we look at, for example, reconnecting rivers to their natural floodplains in order to protect from flooding. We also work a lot on coasts, as mentioned, with specific types of ecosystems. The benefit of nature-based solutions is that they often have co-benefits, not just for disaster risk reduction and adapting to climate change, but also particularly for livability in cities themselves. And we are looking more and more at and how to maximize those co-benefits. There are particular interests in nature-based solutions at the moment because they are often beneficial for mitigation efforts as well. Now, an organization like UNEP, we are a global organization working with headquarters of countries globally. So our natural focal point and interlocutors, they're often member states, they're national governments. However, more and more, we know that cities are an increasingly important area to look at in terms of adaptation. And some of the reasons that we are looking more and more at cities is that, of course, more and more populations are living in cities and they're particularly vulnerable. But nature-based solutions have a number of important roles to play, specifically for cities. We know, for example, that nature-based solutions and EBA interventions can often make cities more resilient to climate and health risks, including pandemics and zoonotic diseases such as COVID-19. But one of the benefits of looking at nature-based solutions for cities is that they also increase their livability of cities, of the livability of people living in cities. And they do that, for example, by reducing urban sprawl. We promote green buildings and infrastructure, parks and community gardens, urban forest areas, and these have important mitigation, but also pollution reduction benefits. One of the questions that I saw come into the chat had to do with air quality and air pollution. And obviously protecting and restoring forests, for example, in cities can not only improve air quality, but also improves water quality in cities. And so there are a lot of co-benefits of nature-based solutions that I think make them particularly interesting. And as mentioned, we're looking more and more at the potential of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based adaptation to reduce the threat of zoonotic diseases such as COVID-19. I'd like to give a very particular example of one of the projects that we're working on. It's quite a new one within the Asia Pacific region, and it's in Lao PDR. What we're doing in Laos, which I think is quite interesting, is that we're trying to help 5 different provincial capitals switch from hard or gray infrastructure to more integrated green-gray solutions. Within this project, we are restoring 1,500 hectares of urban wetlands and streams, and creating 18,000 square meters of permeable paving solutions, so permeable pavements and sidewalks. And this is an integrated flood management project. Our focal point and our stakeholders for this project are the provincial governors of these 5 areas. And each of them will be leading city-level project steering committees in order to guide their activities and lead on policy changes in these provincial capitals. And this is really spanning areas such as land use, regulations of waterways, building codes, and other EBA activities in the region. This is a very new project for us, and it's a new way of working, but it's something we're quite excited about because I think this is a good model for how we can work in the future. Now, one of the things that we're doing more and more is we are gathering the information and knowledge that is created through this large portfolio of projects that we have, and we are disseminating this through the Global Adaptation Network, or the GAN. The GAN has existed since 2010 in order to share this information and knowledge globally within regions, between countries. We are an umbrella organization, and we have a very specific and unique relationship with the Climate Change Convention on feeding into those official processes. The Global Adaptation Network is coordinated from our headquarters here in Nairobi, but we work regionally with some of our regional partners. And one of those I'm sure you'll be well familiar with, the Asia Pacific Adaptation Network, or the APAN, which has an upcoming forum in March with which many of us, I'm sure, are collaborating that are here in this call. Together with IUCN, we are leading on the stream for the APAN Forum on nature-based resilience. In addition to these regional nodes, however, which connect this information, gather it, and share it within regions, we also work with a number of important international partners that are outside the UN system. And one of those is the EPIC network. I'm very glad that my colleague Jessica will be here today to speak more about EPIC. What EPIC does is it promotes innovation in communities through links with education, with educational institutions. This is a very interesting partner for us because it works in a way that we are often not able to do. We don't always have a direct link to universities or to cities, but through partnerships like EPIC, with whom we've been collaborating over the last several years, we're able to, I think, really leverage and bring together different areas of expertise and convening powers. I'm quite excited because over the next few months, we're working to expand the EPIC network into the Asia Pacific region. And I'm sure that Jessica will mention a little bit more about this, but we have an upcoming training and launch of the partnership in Asia Pacific. It is going to be held around the APAN Forum. We have a deadline coming up in the next few weeks. I very, very much welcome you to help us disseminate this call to find pairs of cities and universities in order to increase the resilience in these areas. There's more information about the application procedure here. And again, we're very happy to share this presentation so that you can know more about that call. Another initiative I would like to speak on just briefly is one of the initiatives that we do together with the Climate Change Convention through the Nairobi Work Program, and it's called LAKI, the Lima Adaptation Knowledge Initiative. In the past, we have held LAKI workshops in the Asia Pacific region, such as in the Hindu Kush region. And what LAKI does is really help to identify and expand knowledge information, identify gaps that are in regions, and feed this in to the Nairobi Work Program, into the official climate change processes. And we have an upcoming LAKI workshop as well for Pacific Islands that we are holding in the next few months. It will be back to the APAN Forum. And again, here, very keen to share this information and to provide more background information and information how you can get involved with that as well after this seminar. One final thing I'd like to mention is how we're working to scale up finance for nature-based solutions for adaptation. And I'm quite excited because next month, in the coming weeks, we're going to be launching a new global ecosystem-based adaptation fund together with IUCN. It's a 20 million euro fund financed through ICI, the International Climate Initiative of Germany. And it will be a small grants program to promote nature-based solutions innovation in countries around the world. So initiatives that we have, such as EPIC and LAKI, they will be gathering information on the barriers to the uptake of ecosystem-based adaptation, feeding that into the fund in order to look for innovative ways to finance these initiatives in the future. And if you're interested in knowing more about the Global EBA Fund, I also welcome you to get in touch with me after this webinar. I realized that there were many points in those slides, and I was not able to give as much information or background on each one as I'd like, but I would be really happy to provide more information in the question and answer in the chat function, or again, you can reach out to me after the webinar. And I thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liz. I have to apologize in making a mistake in saying that you are based here in Bangkok, but actually you are based in Nairobi, Kenya. Sorry for that. So Dr. Liz spoke about how UNEP is involved in supporting climate adaptations around the globe, especially on ecosystem-based adaptation, which is one very important aspect in terms of combating climate change. And she also provided a very good example from the region here in Asia, that's from Laos. So you can just sort of look at like how those interventions have saved a lot of money and also been, at the same time getting adapted to climate change. And also as a part of our COVID-19 recovery plan, a nature-based solution is one very highly recommended approach towards combating climate change. And she also talked about partnership with EPICnet, and our next speaker will actually talk about more on this. And also you have to watch out for a fund that will soon be launched, that is to support this nature-based solution to combat climate change. And to continue, our fourth speaker is Dr. Jessica Barlow. Dr. Jessica is joining us from USA, California. She is the Vice President of the Education Partnership for Innovation in Communities, that is EPICN in short. She's also the professor at the San Diego State University and the executive director of the Center for Regional Sustainability at the university. So she will present on the EPIC model and how to make cities resilient through large-scale city-university partnership. So please, Dr. Jessica.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you also for the hosts for organizing this webinar. I'm very glad to be here, and thanks also to my colleague Liz, who did a little shout out about the EPIC network. So I am the Vice President of the EPIC network, also a professor at San Diego State University, where I oversee our own EPIC program. So I'll be speaking to the EPIC model from both those perspectives. First, I want to take a step back and talk about the challenges of linking knowledge to practice from the perspectives of cities. So there's tons of research and support and resources and toolkits available for cities, but cities are usually under-resourced in terms of both time and money and staff, and therefore time, and simply don't have the capacity in many cases to be able to access these reports and figure out how to apply them in a local context specific way that's relevant to their communities and their particular environmental and socioeconomic and cultural needs. They don't have the capacity because they may be putting out literal fires or dealing with a global pandemic. And taking risks to implement cutting edge and innovative approaches to address their needs is something that they're also less inclined to do because of political backlash that can sometimes happen. Universities have some complementary qualities. They have excess capacity in the form of thousands of students who want to make a difference. They want to do real world projects that are relevant and meaningful. They want change to happen yesterday. Universities are in the business of creating new knowledge, and they're innovation seeking, and more are trying to be locally relevant by engaging with their local communities. So how can we match these two things more efficiently? It starts actually with a radically simple question that came up at the University of Oregon in the US about 10 years ago. So 5 professors from different disciplines were looking to see how they could collaborate with one another. And they thought they might try it through their courses. And so it came to this simple question: what if we could connect our existing university instructors who are teaching existing courses on campus with existing projects in a community or with a city, and do so at a scale that magnifies value for all? And so what started as a small idea among these 5 professors is now a big idea involving dozens of professors, hundreds of students, and a huge impact, what we call the EPIC model, where EPIC stands for Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities. Now, certainly city-university partnerships are not new, but this model's different because it works within organizational structures of both sides, and it's scaled for impact. So these are city-identified projects that are already part of the city's general fund, already part of their, general plan, and they're already part of their budget. And so the city staff are sharing their local issues, their demographics, concerns, community goals, and challenges. And the students are learning about best practices for addressing those things and developing designs, recommendations, solutions that are specific to that local context. And this is all part of their coursework that they would be doing anyway. And so we'll get multiple classes from different disciplines working on the same project, each providing a unique perspective. And then the city can take those ideas and designs and solutions and apply them or combine them in a way that they find most relevant to their context. And this is happening on a massive scale. And so what do I mean by that? Well, in a typical year, so the idea is to have a strong impact, and by focusing a lot of people on several projects in the same community so that the impact is felt. There's this energy and a sense of community and investment on the part of everyone involved. And so in a typical year with a single city partner, we could get as many as 500 or more students from different disciplines on campus, dedicating tens of thousands of hours of effort to that community. Now, it's common for the city partner to pay a fee for the partnership. What they're paying for is staffing of the people that are needed to coordinate all of the classes, arrange field trips, get reports written. It's not a lot of money for the city, but it's just enough that they are also invested in the outcome. And this also ensures that we're targeting projects that are high priority for them. Students present their work to city staff, to elected officials. Their work is written up in an official report that is provided to the city. And the city now has designs and solutions of how to best implement best practice in their own local context. Students, in turn, are also better prepared to enter the workforce because they have a better understanding of the community's needs. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you or show you some examples of the kinds of projects that have been carried out by universities across the world that are implementing the EPIC model. Together, the universities that form the EPIC network around the world have completed over 1,500 projects with local communities. And so these are just a sample, small sample of the kinds of projects that EPIC programs can do. And I think one of the most important ones is the engaging of marginalized or vulnerable community members. So this is something that all EPIC programs do. And so students are disarming. They can serve as neutral third parties and can get input from and share ideas with community members that city officials can't reach, perhaps because of trust issues or cultural or linguistic barriers. And so this kind of engagement can be applied in all the different types of projects that would be carried out through an EPIC partnership. An example of a project, a more specific project, was from the University of Oregon. Again, the original EPIC program. They carried out a study on industrial byproduct reuse, and this resulted in an $800,000 cost savings and revenue annually for the city partner, and this is now part of that city's regional development strategy. The University of Zambia's highly successful EPIC program is focused on improving urban sustainability in informal settlements in the city of Lusaka. GIS mapping, so Geographic Information Systems mapping, is also a common project that EPIC programs do to do best use of community resources and assets for development and redevelopment of different sites. Active transportation is another common focus. So the University of Nairobi's EPIC program has been working on improving pedestrian safety in the city of Nairobi. Climate action planning is a big component of EPIC programs as well. So this is from my own program at San Diego State University. We've done a number of different studies addressing air, water, and noise pollution, looking at how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, coming up with zero waste strategies and active transportation initiatives. We have also worked with UN Habitat by applying their guiding principles for climate action planning toolkit with our city partner Lemon Grove. It was the first North American city to use that toolkit. So the impact is direct and local. As I mentioned, the city has to be invested in the partnership. They have to pay a fee typically, but the impact is really felt. So for National City, another city that my program partnered with, that partnership involved working on a wayfinding system, a signage system for navigating the city, and we helped jumpstart the efforts for that. And that small amount they paid to our program to initiate the project actually led to over $1 million in grants. Another city partner of ours, Lemon Grove, has won several awards for partnering with us, and they calculated that their partnership led to an 800% return on their initial investment in the partnership. So what started as a small idea among 5 professors is now a big idea in a model of city-university partnership that has spread across the US and internationally. And together, the universities that implement this model form an international nonprofit organization called the EPIC Network, which you've heard of now. And we're committed to transforming higher education for community good. And as a network, we aim to expand our reach in transforming higher education by helping cities with their resilience goals, by sharing this model through numerous different outreach efforts, such as this current presentation, as well as our annual conferences, specially commissioned workshops. We've held workshops at Resilient Cities, 2 in South Africa. That's where we launched a regional network, EPIC Africa. And even earlier this year, we did a especially commissioned workshop, and we provide ongoing technical assistance to new and established programs. And numerous agencies have been a part of these expansion efforts over the years, particularly our international training workshops. We've had a number of stakeholders involved with that. You heard about some of that already from Liz. What you also heard from her is that we do have an upcoming training workshop for Asian countries, sponsored by the Global Adaptation Network and START. And I can provide a link to this in the chat when I'm done here. So that's an opportunity for training in March around the APAN conference. And then finally, I just want to share ways to connect with us. I can also provide these in the chat box, so I'll paste those in so you have those links. And with that, I will finish. And thank you all for your time. Thanks for the host for organizing and facilitating the event.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Jessica, for your presentation. She talked about the EPICNet model and how does the universities and the city can link together and use this model to plan our city resilient activities. So I would urge all of you to reach out to EPICN or EPIC Network to develop this partnership. And also, I think there's a bit to learn. I think it has already been sort of like going quite well in African regions. So I think we also sort of like, there is a training program that coming up. So we have to watch out for this. We'll send you the link. And also, I think it will be good for us to learn from the African experience so that we can replicate this here. So thank you so much once again. Now, our 5th speaker is one of our colleagues, Armin Rostomyan. He's joining us from Vienna in Austria just now. He's a senior program manager at the Regional Resource Center for Asia and Pacific with us. And he will be talking about RRCAP's role in the region in strengthening climate adaptation with a focus on capacity building in disaster risk reduction. So I'd like to invite Armin to deliver your presentation, please.
Thank you very much for introduction, Dr. Lentap. Let me share my presentation. And what I'll try to do during my presentation is to focus on two key focus areas I want to share with you during this webinar is what AIT Regional Resource Center for Asia Pacific was doing to support Making Cities Resilient global campaign as of today, and share with you the methodology, lessons learned, and approach we used in this process, as well as what we are planning to do as a part of and in support of MCR 2030 initiative, as well as to share with you some potential new areas we are planning to focus in 2021 and beyond, and see if any of these new areas or new initiatives we are planning to launch could be of interest to you to explore later as part of our possible collaboration. So just a second. Can you see the presentation?
Presentation.
Yeah, okay. So I think our executive director mentioned to you what this Regional Resource Center for Asia Pacific is about. It is an institutional-wide center for Asia Institute of Technology. It was established in 1989 as a joint initiative of Asian Institute of Technology and UNEP. The aim of the Regional Resource Center for Asia Pacific is to bridge the gap between scientific understanding of sustainable development processes and sound policies, national and regional level. Below you see the history map of how this resource center was evolving, starting from 1989 as of today. Within AIT RRCAP, there are three main clusters or hubs. One is air and atmospheric pollution cluster. We have climate change and disaster risk cluster, and waste management and water and sanitation cluster. So the mandate of the organization is to assist countries in Asia and Pacific region to advance their environmental and sustainable development goals through the provision of capacity building, knowledge sharing, policy advice, and research in the thematic areas of climate change, disaster risk reduction, air and atmospheric pollution, and waste management. I want specifically to target one of our flagship programs under climate change and disaster risk reduction cluster, which is building cities and local government resilience to climate and disaster risks. This program was specifically developed to support MCR global campaign, and it is composed of two sets of training initiatives. It's we are providing regional training workshops for the teams of city officials from various countries of the Asian Pacific region, as well as providing training of trainers workshop just to build capacities within the countries on how to use international tools and methodologies. Just very briefly, what we do, what is the key approach of this? As I mentioned, we are focusing on bringing together the city teams of officials. We select from the partner countries and in collaboration and coordination with cities' focal points for disaster risk reduction. From each city, teams of 4 to 5 officials, mainly headed by deputy mayor or general director, and we try to bring city planner. We try to bring in this team finance person, disaster risk reduction person, engineer, that they will come together as specific city teams, and we usually bring together 4 to 5 city teams in one regional training workshop, that they will work together as a team, that they will use the materials and data they will bring together to conduct city resilient assessment using two assessment tools. It's a quick risk estimation tool and scorecard for the cities, and after developing the first draft assessment reports, to use the findings of this assessment report to develop draft city resilience action plan. These training workshops we are convened in Bangkok, in Thailand, and all these training programs we develop as a joint training initiatives in close collaboration and input from experts and colleagues from UNDRR, UN Habitat, UNEP, UNDP, UNSCAP, and EPICNet Asia. What makes this flagship program is so attractive to our participants, because we have a number of cities queuing to take this and participate at this training workshop, because they are very practical. They are very practical in the sense that after the completion of these training workshops, participants not only have enhanced their understanding of the content we are providing and methodology, but they are take with them first draft reports on their cities assessment. They take with them a draft city resilience action plan that they develop together based on the findings of this report. And also last day of the workshops is devoted that they will develop strategies or roadmaps, what they are going to do when they are back to their respective cities to operationalize this action plan, how they are going to implement them, what they are going to do to get finance, what they need to do to ensure that these programs are endorsed, and how this city resilient action plan can be incorporated as a component of wider city development plans. Here in next couple slides, I want to share with you what we are planning to do in 2021 in support of Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative and beyond. As we mentioned earlier, AIT RRCAP is a member of MCR 2030 Regional Coordination Committee for Asia and Pacific. We also applied to become an MCR 2030 supporting partner, and we plan another training workshops in a series tentatively on March 2020. That's a tentative date, and we come back to partners, and the advertise depends on COVID and number of other circumstances. But we plan to have another training workshop, regional training workshops on building cities resilience for city teams of officials in 2021. What we plan to do again new in 21 and beyond, we are quite supportive of blended learning approach to support using the blended learning approach in support of MCR 2030 implementation. When we say blended learning approach, we mean combining face-to-face training workshops with online courses, with series of thematic webinars, with online sessions. And this webinar is one in a row. We want to expand and make them a series of webinars in support of MCR 2030. Because what's happening mainly, our donors and the participants comes back to us and say, okay, you've done this very good training workshop. What's next? How we are going to invest further in building capacities of cities. And we say that the good possibility is to, after these training workshops, to have a follow-up online courses, follow-up thematic webinars, follow-up online courses, to have continuous investment and support to our target audiences. In 2021, we will focus also on this. We plan to use our training modules as well as our partners if they are interested to put them into online course format. We will focus on greater provision of technical advice and guidance to MCR 2030 cities for the on-ground implementation of resilient plans and strategies, provide customized to evolving city needs training workshops on request. We also, in order to address scalability and sustainability issues, will continue focusing on convening joint training of trainers workshops, because when we speak about sustainability and scalability, the key thing is to build with the same capacities as we have in RRCAP and partners in our partner countries. Definitely, we focus on knowledge management, specifically on MCR 2030 knowledge sharing via development of series of case studies and synthesis reports to generate the evidence, to capture the evidence, to capture the knowledge, to document this knowledge, and to share this knowledge through the use of case studies and synthesis reports that will analyze, summarize these case studies and provide set of recommendations to guide upcoming projects in making cities resilience area. We also incorporate AIT RRCAP training into our training program, nature-based solution, urban biodiversity, and city-based management component. We also are planning to develop new training program on localizing SDGs for cities, local governments, and also link them with MCR 2030. In my last slide, I want to also share with you that another focus areas of us for 2020 and beyond, we will continue advocating for greater engagement of universities and training centers in cities and local government resilience assessment, planning, and implementation processes. And we also plan to explore possibilities of greater and meaningful engagement of faith actors. When we say faith actors, we mean faith-based organizations and religious leaders in MCR 2030 implementation process. Why engaging faith actors? Because in number of international forums by many of UN agencies and international organizations, they are quite vocal in voicing their emphasis that specifically for conflict-affected countries, we cannot be successful in SDGs implementation, in Paris Agreement, in Sendai framework implementation, if these key actors, faith actors, are not engaged and contributing to this process. Just to give you some data below, you see it's taken from Pew Research Center. Worldwide, there are more than 8 out of 10 people identify themselves with religious group. There are 5.8 billion religiously affiliated people around the globe, representing 84% of the world population. I want to leave you with these new areas we may consider further collaboration and the focus of and niche for RRCAP to support making MCR 2030 initiative, and would be happy to answer to any questions you will have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armin, for your presentation. He briefly touched upon the role of RRCAP in the region, especially in terms of supporting capacity building on the disaster risk reduction. So I think with these presentations now, we have ended all the presentation sessions. We ended the presentation session, and now we will have a Q&A session. So we will be asking questions to our distinguished speakers. We got some questions from the chat box here, but also we actually got quite a lot of questions during the registration. So we would like to apologize if we ran out of time to ask all the questions, but we will do our best to address them all. Firstly, I would like to inform that there was a question on sharing the presentations. What we'll do is we will put all the presentations together, upload on a Google Drive, and then we will share you to your email. So that is how we will be sharing sharing the presentations for you all. So to address one question, firstly from the chat box below, there's one question on air pollution and solid waste management, which has sort of become quite an issue in mega cities. So to combat this, he asked, like, how can we combat this via a sustainable development goal? Maybe probably looking at like sustainable development goal as an approach. So how do we address this? So this is a sort of like quite a common question. I think, would any of you would like to address this? Probably, I think it's relevant to Kurt. I think probably.
Yes, I would be.
Please.
I would be pleased to address if you can hear me okay. These are issues that are not just in the mega cities anymore, but they are really, very relevant for all size cities. Some municipalities in this region in Asia Pacific actually spend up to 40% of their annual budgets on solid waste management. A lot of that is actually on collection, transport, and disposal to landfill. So there are opportunities to offset those costs if cities are able to implement on the front end, recycling programs, reuse programs, and identify those waste streams that have some value. So for instance, those organic waste in particular can be converted to compost, not just at large scales, but there are some very small scale interventions that are called integrated resource recovery centers that convert organic waste into biomass or compost. And then that is obviously transformed into a marketable commodity. On the air pollution, I think this one's a bit more difficult, but requires, there are some elements as it relates to the sources of air pollution that are within the control of local authorities. But actually, when you look at them more deeply, there are very few. So it requires cities to work with national governments and with industry to identify what are the specific sources of air pollution that are affecting their communities. We know that the sources are related to agricultural burning, are related to vehicle emissions, and are related to power generation and to a lesser extent, but still at a large share, industrial air pollutants. Each of those require, depending on the source, different interventions, but it's unlikely that any city can address all of them individually. So it does require kind of cooperation at the regional and subnational level as well to develop the policy interventions. There are obviously proven technologies that will reduce emissions. There are some policy interventions that promote clean air, whether it be through public transport and reduction of transport emissions. But really, we need to come back to a kind of a decarbonization of the economy and of power generation to really achieve some large-scale reductions on the air pollution side. Coming back to solid waste management, we mentioned in our report the engagement of the informal sector. There are some communities where informal waste pickers are picking up to 90% of plastics. And obviously there are markets, but there needs to be some interaction between the informal economy and the formal recycling value stream. And that's where I think cities can be effective in creating that local circular economy that links the informal sector and larger solid waste management companies. Over from me.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. The next one, there is, we got a question from one of the participants during the registration, and I think this is quite a relevant question. It's asking, to what extent are cities in Asia and the Pacific resilient to pandemic like COVID-19? So I would like to request Mr. Omar to answer this. if it's okay with you.
Yes, thank you very much for that very relevant and timely question. Pandemics and biological hazards in general are part of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And so most people, when think of the disasters, they think of climate-related hazards, they think of earthquakes, but pandemics are also one of the risks that cities and national governments should be guarding against. And I think COVID-19 really brought into focus the importance of this multi-hazard approach to risk governance. So we've recently conducted a review of risk governance in the region, focused mainly on national responses, but I think we can distill from it some implications on local governance as well. And one thing we found out is that even when countries had national disaster risk reduction strategies that were Sendai aligned, and they included mentions of biological hazards, they were short on details. So roles and responsibilities of different sectoral actors, Ministry of Health and so on, were not explicitly mentioned. And so we saw the implication of that in the response, where many countries had to stand up ad hoc governance mechanisms to respond to the pandemic, task forces, emergency centers, and committees. And interesting thing about these structures is that they were interagency. And so they included all the relevant actors and agencies and reported usually to the head of state or someone very senior in government. And this really is the ideal risk governance structure that all countries, and even at the local level, governments should be adopting to make sure that you have all the relevant actors on the table when you are planning against different risks, whether it's climate-related risks or biological risks, because also there's the cascading impacts of disasters. And we saw that social protection became a very big issue in this region and elsewhere, and SCAP has done a lot of good work on this. And these are all things that need to be addressed through a multi-stakeholder approach, and something that we are definitely going to be emphasizing within the MCR 2030 implementation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Omar. The next question is on the EPIC model that Dr. Jessica presented. I think EPIC model has been quite a while been used as a model for resilient cities, working with universities and organizations within the city. And there has been some work already been done in Africa, or there is a forum there already. And then there is also a training been announced by Dr. Lees. Like, can the EPIC model really work in the region like Asia? That's the question.
Thank you for the question. And I think I would say yes, absolutely, because at its core, the model is extremely flexible, it's adoptable and adaptable for different contexts. So it's a framework that makes partnerships work easily. And it's been our experience when we've done these international workshops to see that the core aspects of the model can be nimble for different university and community contexts. So even in the US, the model has been adapted to fit very different areas, from wealthier communities to very low income areas destroyed by natural disaster, very rural areas, very large cities, and even very different types of universities. So, and even smaller colleges. So the whole motivation behind the model is to really get this kind of massive amount of underutilized university talent and just accelerate cities' abilities to meet really urgent needs around climate change, resiliency, and adaptation. So the core components are there, and then the way it's implemented is quite flexible.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. I'm hopeful that after this session, I think you will get quite a bit of inquiry on that. So let's hope for that. And the next
I'm hopeful
question,
as well.
Thank you. The next question, I would like to direct this question to my colleague Armin. It's about ensuring a resilient city action plan and strategies will need an enormous amount of funding from the state budgets and of course other sources. And that is, I think, the main problem or main issues that many people are facing. How can we ensure that such fundings are being made available? Is that okay for you to answer that one?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Purba. I think I would like to share with participants and you what we learn through our training workshops and what has been what is the vision of our participants on this through their experience and lessons learned. What became very clear through our training workshop is that uh, most of our participants and city teams, they recommended us to not have the resilient city action plan as a standalone plan. They highly recommended to consider to developing a roadmap how it can be incorporated as a component of wider city development plan to get access to the city funding on one hand. Another thing which they shared with us is that they highly, there are a number of case studies they shared with us telling that if cities conduct on a regular basis their assessment, their risk assessments, and have a solid action plans and strategies based on the findings of this assessment, it's much easier for them to get tapped in and access international organizations and donor funds. I share with you one example of a city. The mayor called me a year after the training we have, telling that before he never get access to any international funds or donor funds, although he was actively approaching them. But when he has this action plan ready, and when we met with these donors, telling them that this is our 2 assessment reports, which we do on a regular basis after each year, and this is our action plan developed for this year, and this is how much budget I have allocated, and this is how much money I still need that this action plan will be implemented. I think he got access, he got an extra funds from to support his resilient action plan from 3 donor organizations internationally, and also he got an extra funds from national government because they start seeing him as a leader, as a champion in this area. So he got much more funds than he was needed for this strategy and action plan implementation. And he was sharing that having all this, understanding their risk and having on a regular basis done proper assessment and having solid action plans can also help them access not only government funds, but also international funds and be seen and get also political capital seen as a leader or as a role model city in their respective countries.
Okay, thank you, Armin. The next question is especially directed to Mr. Kurt by a participant from the Philippines. Likes to know that there are a problem with flooding and the city is located like in the downstream, and how you sort of strategize this, to combat this such kind of flooding.
Certainly, I think in existing locations or existing cities where they're facing the effects of downstream flooding, the first step is really to map kind of both the watershed, but also the flood mapping or flood areas, floodways, flood plains, etc. There are opportunities, and I think UNEP, also in their presentation also mentioned some nature-based solutions. There are opportunities for kind of softer solutions, such as green streets and constructed wetlands. But in existing conditions, there may need to be a combination of those kind of green infrastructure solutions as well as hard infrastructure, such as storm systems, constructed storm systems. I think from a policy standpoint, it's very important that cities get ahead of their development, and that means implementing regulations that take into account stormwater management as developments occur, and not rely on simply the public system to accommodate all storm management. There are some very successful regulations that have been in place in some Western countries that required any development to manage and maintain its own stormwater system on site and within their boundaries. That led initially to things like kind of very unsightly retention ponds. Over the course and evolution of those solutions, many of those kind of hard infrastructure, unsightly solutions were evolved into actual site amenities, such as rain gardens and you know, green walkways, greenways. So there are opportunities to actually transform these challenges and problems into amenities either within individual sites or at a city or district level. Some conversions of storm systems, kind of canals or constructed channels, can actually be converted into very nice recreational facilities that double as stormwater management in times of flood. But it does take, you know, some initial planning, both understanding where are the potential flood impacts, getting ahead on the policy side and imposing or developing some regulations that will mitigate any future development, and then thinking differently about stormwater management and seeing how the solutions can actually become an amenity to communities.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. So in the interest of time now, I would like to keep this one last question. It's a kind of a general question, and I think it's very important to address. There's a question on the engagement of private companies and private consulting firms in building resilience. So who would like to take this question? I think it's very important because, you know, private sectors and companies are not often being consulted, and it's among NGOs and government officials that normally comes together and work. But I think it's paramount for these companies also to come together and work. So the question is on what role they can play in terms of building resilience.
I think I can answer that question, and I alluded to it briefly in my presentation. So MCR 2030 will include a big component dedicated to the private sector. I think there's obviously the corporate social responsibility aspect where they can be working in collaboration with local governments. But as you mentioned, I think there's a lot of solutions out there in terms of consulting, in terms of technical innovations, technology solutions, and even you know, things like the EPIC network. I mean, I think their ability to pull in research resources to support local planning will all be included, at least hopefully within this registry that we will make available to cities and local officials, so that they can have access to a directory of services based on their needs, based on the kind of planning that they're doing, and then hopefully connect with these partners to, you know, either create a contract or a type of cooperative agreement with them based on their needs, and to pull in these resources and expertise from the private sector.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think with this, we are almost towards the end of our time. And then I would like to thank everyone. And then I'll just sort of conclude it for today. So thank you for bearing with us. Just a soft reminder before I conclude, as the session ends, there will be a short survey which will pop up on your screen. We would like to have your feedback since we will be having a number of sessions later. So it will help us, you know, improve how we conducted this online webinar. So that would be highly appreciated. So today, at the end of this session, we have looked at, I think, 5 important things. Disaster risk reduction and resilience. That's intervention aimed to reduce and mitigate the risks of displacement and increase resilience. We have also looked at sustainable urban development. It's a broad perspective on the environmental sustainability of urban areas. There was a talk on nature-based solutions, which offers a very cost-effective solution. And then the EPICnet, which is kind of a university-city collaboration where we need to reach out. And then capacity development for strengthening cities' resilience to disaster. Now, to achieve all this, to carry forward this, a partnership remains very critical in implementing these actions. And with the understanding of various tools, approaches, and roadmaps used by different organizations today, we hope that this information will support you to develop a joint program which will contribute to a more coordinated and focused response to issues that our cities are facing, especially but not limited to mainstreaming climate change, to what we are doing at the moment right now, from infrastructure to finance to procurement. There are a lot of opportunities to mainstream and then incorporate climate change and sustainability into our future planning. And then I think most importantly, sort of communicating with the citizen about climate change in the ways that matter to them. So yeah, we welcome all of your support and engagement, especially with Making City Resilient 2013 campaign initiative, and look forward to work together in supporting cities in Asia and the Pacific, not only to understand risks and the development strategies and the action plans, but also to share and provide technical support to assist cities with the implementation and share knowledge and best practices to move to more resilient urban development. We hope that this webinar will pave the road for a series of webinars that we will continue with our partners in coming 2021 and beyond, focusing on making our city resilient against the continued climate change. Now with this, I would like to thank all the participants for your time and interest in joining us, and our key partners, UNDRR, UNESCAPE, UNEP, EPICNet, and all of our distinguished speakers today for consenting to deliver presentation on this platform and for their contribution, and most importantly, trusting us as a partner to host this webinar. I would also like to express my gratitude to Ministry of Environment, Government of Japan for their continued support for our program, including this webinar. Lastly, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of my colleagues here at RRCAP, for which many of them have been working behind the scene to make this successful one. Thank you so much and stay safe. Please kindly attend the survey as you leave. We'll see you in next webinar. Thank you so much once again.